Welcome to the Lazy Fluency podcast, where we have casual conversations switching between English and Japanese so that you can learn from and with us along the way. I'm Joey.
And I'm Yami.
And the topic of the day is World War II education. Before we get into that, make sure to like, subscribe, follow, and or drop a review on whatever platform you are listening on. We appreciate the support. And with that out of the way, World War II education. So, December 7th was Pearl Harbor Day, and I normally don't even think about the day, but I have a friend whose birthday is on Pearl Harbor Day, and I was directly asked by a friend, what do Japanese people think about Pearl Harbor? And this ended up sparking a larger discussion. And I thought, why not talk about how like the education systems work in Japan and the US in terms of history and modern history, and specifically World War II. So, my first question for you today in this thing is, also actually I want a disclaimer. We are not giving representations of the entire educational system. These are anecdotal experiences. And yeah, I just want to make that clear. This is not, this is supposed to be a casual talking about history. We're not going to get into which side did what correctly or whatever, or who is guilty or fault, whatever. That's not what this discussion is about. With that out of the way, how is history generally taught in Japan, or your general idea of like the educational structure, like what type of classes do you take, what history you focus on in general?
まあそうね、歴史の授業っていうのは小学校から始まって、で小学校、中学校で高校でその文系理系で分かれるから、そこでね、私は高校ではやった覚えがないね。あ、世界史はやったけど日本史はやってないかな。高校ではね。中学ではどっちもやったのかな。まあ私は結構特別な方で、なんでかっていうと中高一貫校って言って、中学校と高校が一緒の6年間ね、行くやつの、そのプライベートスクールだったから、ちょっと普通の学校とは違うのかな、日本で。
And that's because it was intended for like, what are those called? For college? Like they're...
そう。
Okay.
うん。まあだからちょっと特殊かもしれないけど、まあ少なくとも小学校で、習うね。うん、びっくりするけど。
But what is the focus, generally speaking? World history, Japanese history, and like what periods of time?
でも本当に、例えば日本だったら、日本の縄文時代、なんていうの、猿の時代ね。猿の時代から何を作ってるとか、どういう文化があるとか、からもう江戸時代とかね、明治、昭和とかまで習って、で、戦争とかもね、習うね、戦国時代。
Yeah.
そう、織田信長とかね、そこら辺とか。
In elementary school, is there any focus on world history or modern history?
あるけど、なんか、何年にこういうことが起こって、で、なんていうの？これはこういう出来事だったっていうのは習うけど、まあ、ただの、なんていうんだろうね。まあ、そういう教え方。アメリカでどう教えられてるかはわかんないけど、どうやって教えられるの？
Well, before we go on to America, I would like to add, I was talking with somebody a high school student who was in their third year in Japanese high school. And something I found was very interesting is, and I'll go into America's system, but as Aimi said, history, she didn't really learn that much outside from maybe world history in high school, but in Japanese, at least this person's high school experience, and I think through middle school as well, you can choose to, there's an idea of like electives and then like core subjects and classes, and you can kind of extremely gear your core subjects such that you don't even have to take, for example, this person, his main subjects that he's going to be testing in for entrance exams into college are English and Japanese history, not math, not science, not anything, English and Japanese history. Those are the subjects that he's like, are his core subjects. So I found those very interesting. What was your situation? Like, how many?
多分その人は、文系で、多分私立文系なんだよ。プライベートユニバーシティの文系で、私は、理系、医学系っていうのは理系に入るんだけど、は、 パブリックスクールに入りたいんだったら、まあ、日本語、国語ね、英語、社会、理科、数学、まあ、理科の中にもいろいろ科学とかさ、物理とか生物とかがあるんだけど、まあ、それは全部やらないといけないの。でも、私立、プライベートだと、国語はやんなくていいのかな。で、数学、理科、英語の3科目、まあ3、4科目で OK なのね。だからその人は文系っていう。
And is this something that you're ascribing onto the person? Or like you're saying this person is bunke, that means they chose to be bunke?
うん、そうそうそう。自分で文系進むって決めたら、そのね、それだけやってればいいから、逆に他の教科をやって使わないと無駄になっちゃうから、そこの教科に絞ってやっていくっていうのが、まあ受験のスタイルなの。
That might be applicable to like US colleges somewhat. And I went to a liberal arts school, so you had to do all the core subjects. But I feel like even in trade, or not trade schools, but larger state schools, you still have to take general electives like math and sciences. So I find that interesting. But yeah, I'll go on to, so for my American experience with history being taught, it goes, let me see, elementary school, I don't really have that many memories regarding that. Generally speaking, I think it was a lot of like modern like U.S. history, as well as actually a decent amount of world history, I'd say, but more so in the sense of what is considered to be like just kind of awareness, like these things exist, these religions exist. Here are some like large facts that are very major like roles in different countries. In middle school, I'd say that's where there's actually more focus on like choosing different regions and going through them. Like I remember a whole region like on Africa, and I had to memorize all the countries in Africa with their capitals, which now I've forgotten. And as well as with other locations in the world. And then high school is actually where U.S. government and U.S. history is most important, at least in my experience. And that's where the majority of that, at least in my experience, was there. And you actually have to take a U.S. history and like a U.S. government exam, or I think they're separate, but to pass high school.
そうね。まあ、to pass, 高校受験ってことでしょ?
Yeah. Also, just while we're at it, is there any sort of you have to learn about Japanese government in Japanese school? It doesn't seem like that. Nobody I've talked to knows how the electorate system works.
私、実は、中学受験してるから、中学受験でそういうことはまあ、小学生の時ね。小学生の時にそういうね、なんとか選挙とかはやったけども、今は全然覚えてない。そう。
That's crazy. I mean, yeah, it's mandatory to get out of high school. You have to pass like government, like U.S. government, which covers how we hold our elections, what each body of government does, what the role of the governments are, the powers they have. And then you also learn the whole history about how like the Declaration of Independence, our like, history of Britain, and all that. But do you feel like that? Like I said, every time I mention any sort of Japanese politics, everybody not only is disinterested, but also seems extremely confused to how everything works.
まあ、そうね。まあ、文系の人は習ってるけど、理系の人は結構捨ててる人がいるから、社会系ね。社会っていう教科を捨てて、理系だけやってる人っていうのもいるし、あと、文系の人でもやっぱり、テストが受かればいいやと思ってるから、字面だけ覚えてあんま内容理解してないとかっていうのもあり得るとは思う。
But do you think that like even within bunke, for example, the person I was talking about before, they were only mainly when I asked them about what Japanese history they were studying, and I said, which we'll get into the topic about World War II. Is there much like modern Japanese history? And he said, no, the vast majority of it is studying older eras and like stuff like that. How much? I guess we can transition now. How much of that history covers World War II? Or any of the events, even in the 1900s, like Japan, what was it called? The wars between Japan and Russia.
多分その人さ、あれじゃん、日本史のことを話してんじゃない？世界史だったら絶対ワールドワー2はね、結構ちゃんとやると思うよ。
But Japan was like one of the major players in World War II. So how does that not fall under Japanese history?
多分まあ、日本史の中でもそれはあるとは思うけど、日本史っていうと結構、まあ、なんとか時代、ね、江戸時代、戦国時代、なんとか時代とかね、そういうのを中心にやると思う。で、その受験するときに日本史を取るか世界史を取るかってもう分かれるから、そこの違いなんだよ。だから、そういう世界史をメインにやりたかったら世界史取って日本史取らないから。
I find that extremely interesting that such a large part of why Japan is currently the way it is omitted from Japanese history. Like that's the whole reason Japan, like one of their like largest pushes into like massive industrialization. It was because of the US's involvement post World War II. So the fact that's not even mentioned is interesting. But your idea is it might be mentioned in world history, or do you think you know it's mentioned in world history? Like when did you learn about World War II?
なんかあんま覚えてないけど、中学とかまあもう小学校の時だな。小学校のクラムスクールで覚えた気がする。
Cram school.
そう。
But that's not your actual school, so that's optional.
そう、オプショナルだった。
So it wasn't part of public school.
まあ、it was like あれだよ、エレメンタリーでも確かね、教えられた気がするな。で、中学校では絶対やった。
And what do you remember how it was taught or the structure, how they presented World War II?
いや別になんかどっちがいいどっちが悪いとかじゃなくて、なんだ、ただ事実をね述べていくっていう、ただこれの1900何年に何々が起こってとかそう。
So they didn't talk about like any of the historical significance of the events, or maybe like any of the philosophy behind, let's say like fascism for like Nazis or Germany, or why and how Japan. I'm saying, did they just like read dates, or did they talk about any of the context outside of that?
あれ先生によると思うよ。面白い先生だったら結構その背景のストーリーとかね言ってね、それが覚えやすくて、まあ世界史面白いなってなるけど、先生の裁量による。先生がただ教科書読み上げるだけの人言ったら1900何年に何が起こりました。覚えてください。後日テストに出ます。だけだけど、私の先生は、普通にね、behind the story とか結構言ってくれた。
But, okay, so I mean, I have a lot of thoughts there. I'm learning things as we go. This is interesting. But, so all that other, what you call, so for me, the main point of World War II history is the politics and the philosophy and like how that can actually affect and lead to very detrimental effects to all countries involved. But it seems like what you're saying is that's considered to be the after, not that really important, and it's up to the professors to actually spell out to you why fascism is bad. Like, you know what I'm saying? It seems like there's just like well, Japan was in a war. Am I getting that wrong? It seems like you're saying they're like, well, Japan fought in a war and they lost and they got nuked twice, by the way. Anyways, moving on to what happened in the Edo Jidai. Do you get that?
だから先生によってそういうなんかビハインドストーリーをテストに出す人もいるの。なんで日本はこうしたのかとか、なんでアメリカはこういうことでこういう行動をしたのかとか出す先生もいるよ。それは本当に私は分からない。私の先生は良かったから。
This everything makes a lot more sense now from my perspective. I had an assumption that it was something like that, but that's a little worse than I thought. I thought that they would have potentially done the reverse, where they go like, I know Japan now is a very like reflective, and we're very good ties with the US and Japan. And to be clear, I'm not saying that the US is, I'm not a US fanboy. You probably know from hearing all my different rants about the US. But I'm especially when it comes to the US and its history with imperialism and taking over. I mean, there's so many, just to make it clear, like, yeah, US and Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, like Puerto Rico, the whole way they got there. So I'm not fanboying about the US here, but I just find it interesting that there's no focus on anything but like dates. So, I mean, I'll go over the U.S. perspective. So, U.S. is a country that is always basically in war. We were just in war, and we pulled all our troops out like 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago. And so I feel like because of that, there's always like we like, especially in our history. So I'll go into like our history section or whatever, but the U.S. likes telling everybody, and especially its U.S. citizens, about U.S.'s best moments. And one of those best moments is definitely World War II. So World War II was, I learned about in elementary school, middle school, and high school, and spent like full semesters. And at least in high school, I remember being a multi-semester thing about going through like what the Holocaust was, how like in like Anne Frank's. Do you know Anne Frank? Does that ring a bell?
ナチスのあれでしょ?
Yeah.
知ってるよ.
Yeah, and going in through the diaries, how exactly all of like that, like they putting stars to mark people as Jew or not. I mean, they'd wear star. They would differentiate people being Jewish, and then they'd bring them over, and like obviously the build up into the war and stuff like that. And then there's a big emphasis. It's actually funny. The U.S. does in my history class. The focus is on Germany, and the relationships between U.S. and Germany, and how the war concludes, and like all the bad things Germany did. But there's very, very little talk about Japan getting nuked twice. It's kind of like, well, it's kind of like, well, Japan. The story I was taught from America's perspective is, well, Japan, their emperor was, I mean, which is, there's some truth to this, but the emperor is kind of like extremely, extremely reluctant to surrender. And so we are taught that the U.S. firebombed Japan in a bunch of different locations. Japan would not surrender under any circumstance. They had this experimental equipment that the nuke, they tried it out in like a desert. And they're like, okay, we need to use this because no other thing's working. Therefore, Japan was bombed twice. But anything about like the radioactive effects or like the long-term effects of Japan, or even like the U.S. occupation in Japan, is an extremely small portion of World War II, considering how much we cover it.
逆に多分被害者の日本はそのまあ広島長崎にね原爆を落とされて、まあ、原爆ドームとかね、そういうのが、まあ、今あるよとか、あと、小学校かな？小学校の時に、なんていうんだ、修学旅行かな？課外学習か。課外学習で、広島に行って原爆ドーム直接見て、歴史を学ぶとかね、あと、被害者っていうのは違うわ。被爆者の人の生の声を聞いてなんか勉強しましょうっていうやつはあった。
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely feel like there's also, even with like the Fukushima like radiation explosion, there's still definitely even though as far as I understand, radiation is actually extremely clean energy. It's like one of the most in terms of its effects on like the world and climate, at least if maintained properly. Because of, well, obviously like the Fukushima explosion, and I mean, but even before that, the nukes, I feel like anything with radiation has a very, like you get a lot of pushback in Japan because of the history with obviously nukes. Do you feel like people ever talk about radiation in Japan? I watched a whole documentary on it, I remember, but what is it?
まあ少なくともあれでしょ、2011年以降はそういう話増えたと思うよ。けどその前はあんまね、学校でも習わなかったよ。
So after Fukushima, not like, but you said was there a focus on talking about the effects of war, or like, for example, reflecting on, because Japan's been in peace for so long, was there anything about like, because there's a lot of philosophy surrounding this, and when it comes to Japanese media or other stuff, but in school, was there any like reflection on this is why countries should be hesitant about going into war or anything like that?
いや、先生の意見によらないそれ。先生がそう思ってたら授業でそう言うしさ。
This is interesting, I guess, because I feel like in putting the politics, I mean, obviously depends what you want to classify as politics, but putting a spin or at least having a narrative is something that is like, I think a big portion of a lot of U.S. just teaching or education. Whether it be like in any subject almost. Like even in my math classes, I was learning about not just like when I learned about a formula, my professor would talk to me about, introduce like the history of the person who came up with the formula. And,
そういうの話す人はいるよ。
Maybe, and I don't know obviously how much of that is part of a curriculum.
カリキュラムの中には入ってないと思うよ。そういう。ね。
Yeah. But I mean, this is to say that generally speaking, I think in the US, the perspective is that the US was justified for nuking Japan twice because Japan wouldn't surrender. And then what do you feel like is the opinion, or if there is any opinion that is taught about how Japanese people should view World War II?
どう人が第二次世界大戦について考えるべきか?
Yeah. Also, like, is like blame placed on the US? Is it placed on Japan? Is it placed on both? Is blame moved towards Germany? Is that even talked about?
いや、だから、そういう、なんかどうこう考えるのが正しいとか言われない。
No, but I'm saying there are no narratives that are being discussed. They're saying like, for example, I told you in the US, the way that we are basically taught is Japan would not surrender under any circumstances. Therefore, we had to nuke them, which is definitely that's subjective analysis of the situation.
こうされたからこうするしかなかった。
Yeah.
いや、多分ね、それはね、多分日本ダメだ。ここはいい悪いとか言わないから、言っちゃいけないから。あれなんだけど、日本って割とね、ドイツと組んだり、いろいろなんか過去にね、いろいろやってきたから、どちらかというと加害者なんじゃない？だからそう、なんていうの？あんまり、ね、被害者的なストーリーは話されないんじゃない？
Well, in Germany, from what I understand, obviously Germany was the main player, and Japan kind of ended up just teaming up with Germany because like Hitler's not Japanese, obviously. But at least from my understanding of Germany, is Germany takes it extremely seriously, and they're all like the country itself is very remorseful to the point that like in America, you'll make, because we were on like the anti-Nazis, anti-Hitler team, so we can make casual jokes about like World War II or anything like that as a way to poke fun of it. But my understanding is if you make that to Germans, like that is extreme, like in any context, that is an extreme like no-go. You can't talk about that.
Taboo.
Yeah, but I don't feel like that is the case with Japan. I just feel like nobody has any opinions.
少なくともお年寄りの人は必ずあれだよ、いい気分を害すると思うよ。なんでかっていうと、その人たちは戦争を経験したりとかね、いろいろ。
No, but in what sense would they be like offended?
まあ家族が例えばおじいちゃんがアメリカとのその戦争で死んだとかね。そしたらアメリカに行くむじゃん。
Okay, so you do feel like they have some like older people have feelings of dislike towards American military.
そりゃそうだ。だってね、原爆でね、ね、落とされてさ、亡くなった人もいるから、そういう人はやっぱりね、悪いアメリカ嫌いという人もいるし、で、その家族がそうなっちゃったら、その孫とかも嫌いという人もいるかとは思うよ。
Yeah, I mean, I definitely expect that. I mean, that's kind of inevitable. But something I found interesting was, I just keep reiterating. So I majored in Japanese literature in college, as well as computer science. But and one portion of that was when I studied abroad. Is I went to Hiroshima, which we were talking about, and went to the Genbaku Dome. I can't remember the English version of that, but it's the epicenter of the nuke blast. And heard a speech, as you were mentioning, from one of the survivors, and something I found was very interesting. And when I read, we read Hadashi no Gen. Do you know Hadashi no Gen? Yeah. So I mean, I'll talk about Hadashi no Gen first, and then go into the survivor story. But Hadashi no Gen is about World War II, obviously, and it's about the perspective of a kind of citizen in World War II. It's not really about the military as much. It's not about the larger politics. It's more about the life of a person. Gen. And I believe he gets recruited, unless I'm misforgetting the story. When I remember the story, I'm remembering the beginning and the people. But one of the things that, and this is written by a Japanese person, this isn't a like American book. One of the things I found interesting is, and from other sources, like historical sources, and from my professor who was teaching me, who's also Japanese for context, is that a large percentage of the citizens and people were not really in favor of the war effort. They were simply, especially because Japan, if we're thinking about Japan at the time, this is before super like hyper industrialized Japan that like turns into this crazy powerhouse. They were at the time very poor. The emperor kind of made everybody give them their food and all their clothing, shoes, and stuff like that. And that's a big focus of Hadashi no Gen, who's barefoot, which is a big part of the story because they have to give their shoes and stuff to the military. And it was more of like the imperial power, I guess, demonstrating its power across all the people. And so, for example, going into the personal experience from the person who spoke at the Hiroshima Memorial, who was actually in Hiroshima within 5 miles of the epicenter explosion at the time of the explosion, who had like, I think everybody in her family died except for her, from what I remember, except for a sister, I believe, who was getting groceries, is what she said. She basically said that when the war ended, she was extremely happy, even though they lost. And another thing that she mentioned was the fact that because their family was like very poor, and they were actually very critical of the emperor as well, even at the time, because they didn't have that many resources. And one thing she said was that she, the U.S., after they bombed both places, and there was an official surrender. At least I don't want to misremember this, but according to what I remember, my professor told me it was like 10 or 12 years later when Japanese citizens were actually informed about what happened in World War II. So that they were nuked. So a lot of people didn't even know what happened. They just knew there was a flash, and obviously people died, but they didn't know exactly what happened, what hit them, or whatever. And so the U.S., for at least this person here, was the person who informed the speaker that the war was over. And the U.S. flew over. They dropped blankets, and they also dropped notes, and basically saying. Yeah, and so they dropped notes saying that the emperor surrendered, or Japan surrendered, and the war is over. And she said that she started crying with joy when she saw the notes because the quality of the paper was so high. She realized that, now this sounds like a weird thing to say, but because of how poor they were, the quality of the paper that was sent down from the planes was so high that she knew that Japan stood no chance against winning the war, and she was happy that it came to an end. And they also had blankets or whatever. So I find it interesting. She said she did not carry resentment towards America. And she was somebody within the epicenter of the blast who had her family die due to the atomic bomb. So that was very moving. Yeah.
ね、だってジャパンが勝ってもね、アメリカが勝ったとしても、まあ勝ち負けじゃないんだけど、だって平和が一番だからさ、やっぱり戦争は終わってほしいじゃん。何がどうであれ。戦争が終わったことに対してもハッピーだったでしょ?
Yeah, no, I'm just saying it was moving to hear that like even somebody who lost the majority of her family in the bomb somehow wasn't resentful. At least she said she wasn't resentful towards the U.S. Because at least the war was brought to a close, which is like a very. I mean, I'm not sure what the average American. I mean, I can guess. I can guess that the average American probably thinks most people are extremely resentful of America in some way because Japan has a history of, at least it's perceived they have a history, and they do in some, like with Korean history, Japanese history, Chinese history, Japanese history. There's a lot of different events there, and there's definitely truth to that. But with my understanding, at least with people I met in World War II, the average person isn't hyper resentful towards the U.S. Maybe older people are, like you're saying, but.
ああ、まあそうね。まあ愛国心がよほど強くないと。ね。まあ、なんか戦争とかってなんか自分の意見だけど、愛国心よりかは自分のさ、経験によってさ、その国が嫌いだの好きだの変わり、左右されると思うんだよ。なんか例えばさ、戦争でまあ日本とアメリカ戦って、で、まあ負けたとかなっても、アメリカ軍にまあ自分の家族が助けられたとか自分が助けられたとかなるとアメリカまあ好きっていう好感は持つからなんていうの国が負けてもアメリカ軍にいいことされたらその国は好きになるからなんて言ってることわかる?
Yeah.
そうそうそう。
I mean, that's the effect. There's not to we've gone on for a while, but there's like a comic that I've seen of Japan, China, and Korea, where Korea It's like, I hate Japan. It's like an angry ball. It's like, I hate you and I hate China. And then China's like, I hate Japan and I hate Korea. And then Japan is like, well, I dislike China. Oh, and Korea is like, K-pop's cool. Like they're basically like completely ambivalent. Obviously, it's not a government, but it's like the people. But yeah.
その人自身の経験によるんです、好き嫌いは、その国が。そう。
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Hopefully, you guys found this conversation interesting.
Hi, guys.
戻った。
We're back. Okay, so in the middle section, we're going to talk about experiences.
台湾もない話。
Yeah. So this week we experienced a really good one. Yeah. Which is oysters.
So.
Yeah.
牡蠣.
Yeah. So oysters. So the good thing about this is, so the oysters we had was, how do I say, 600円 for 1 kilo.
Which is like $4.50.
Yeah. Yeah, and we had like 8 or 9 oysters in a bucket, and the bucket, one bucket is for, 600円。
でもなんでこの話をしてるかというと、もちろん値段の違いはすごく素晴らしい。でもそれだけじゃなくて、その食べ方は全然違う。アメリカの牡蠣の食べ方とか。でその雰囲気は全然違う。
Yeah, but we do have, so, okay, the oysters we had, so we, how do I say, yaku?
You cook them.
Yeah, so basically, put
grilled,
oysters on
barbecue.
So, grill, and you put the lid. So, lid. So. Then, we waited for like 6 minutes to be cooked, and that's 焼き牡蠣っていうのかな？
焼き牡
蠣。そう、焼き牡蠣わかんない。
でもつまり、こういう牡蠣を食べることは、アメリカだと、高級の食べ物として見られてる。牡蠣は。で、ほとんどの場合は、冷凍というか、全然焼いてない牡蠣を生で、生牡蠣。それ、日本で食べるの？
Yeah, we do. I never experienced this yakigaki before. Yeah, I have had namagaki instead, like before. So.
何回？
I don't remember how many times, but
でもなんか3回以上とか？
Yeah, but so yeah, people do eat namagaki in Japan, so we both have yakigaki and namagaki.
でも生牡蠣食べたらなんかどのぐらい普通にかかると思うの？
It's pretty expensive, I guess, like 300 yen to 500 yen for one oyster. Not sure.
マジで？
Not sure, but if it's expensive one, then 1,000 yen. Yeah.
アメリカで私が牡蠣を食べたときにほとんどは牡蠣につき3ドルか4ドルで、オレゴンで食べたことがあるんだけど、なんか、オイスター、牡蠣の、ただ売ってる場所はそんなになかった。この店は牡蠣のためにあるみたいなことが多かった。で、なんか牡蠣食べたかったらこの場所に行かなくちゃいけない。で、なんか高級な食べ物として見られてるので、なんか、日本の普通のなんか、何でしたっけ？ラーメン屋というか、そう、屋台は違う。寿司寿司のなんか高級な寿司のバーを想像してください。
江戸前寿司かな。
そう。何でしたっけ？料理人つまりが牡蠣を用意して、板前さんが牡蠣を用意してくれて、それで、バーで、食べて、何でしたっけ？その牡蠣を。
生牡蠣？
生牡蠣、そう。
でも、そうね、we do have oyster bars in Japan, so that's where we normally eat. And also in 東北 area, so which is 宮城とか、I guess. とか、あと、広島は、they're famous for oysters.
で、牡蠣を食べてる 時に、まあ、何でしたっけ、その揃えというんですかね、その牡蠣と一緒に何を使うの？レモンとか見たんだけど。
レモンとか、あと、オイスターソースとか、まあ、salt。
horseradish。
What's that?
英語って日本語で全然わかんないんだけど、わさびに似てる。その味に関しては、horseradish は。まあ、わさびに似てるから、多分わさびに、だと同じようなことだと思う。まあ、つまり、600円はすごかったから、こういうことについて話したかったんだけど。
It's not the average price, so just, disclaimer だね。
でも、日本にいたら、ぜひ、これは普通の、まあ、この店の名前知らないんだけど、例えば、他の地域ではこういうような600円の牡蠣見つけたら、すごくいい、取引なので。
そうだね。まあ、そうね、広島が一番、ジャパニーズになっちゃった。Hiroshima is the famous place for oysters. So maybe you can have oyster okonomiyaki, Hiroshima style. Yeah, it's really famous.
広島に行った時に、お好み焼き食べた。でも高かった。そう。
Yeah, because they use oysters.
でもなんか、お好み焼きを思うと、すごく、まあ、下品は違うけど、なんというか、その高級じゃない食べ物。でも、もちろん、広島の牡蠣はすごく高級な食べ物なので、そのお好み焼きと牡蠣を一緒に食べると、ちょっと変のように感じるんだけど、まあ、個人的に私は。
very bono だから。
そう。でも、とりあえず、他の、すごくいいこと、に関しては、今週、東京に行った。私たち。
東京。
そう。で、こういう話したことないと思うけど、私結構ボードゲームの大ファンです。で、高校の時に、そのボードゲームの、サークルをやっていた。で、まあ、子供の時にも、カードゲームとか作ったことはある。でも、もちろん、公式的なカードゲームじゃなくて、ただ、私と友達が遊べるタイプ。でも、初めて、何でしたっけ、名前。宣伝したい。Jelly board games?
I don't know. But jelly, yeah. The store had jelly one or two times in the name. Jelly.
まあ、パンデミックの間では、ボードゲームは結構流行ってた。まあ、なんか、アメリカだとそういうボードゲーム文化が結構強いと思うんだけど、コロナの中ではそういう、もちろん、実際に会えないから、家族とのボードゲームが人気になったという話を、たくさんの店員さんから聞きました。アメリカでは。でも日本ではなんか、そういうボードゲームをやる人はあまりやったことないから。
Yeah, I've never heard. Yeah. At least, yeah, around me. So.
でも私が住んでる田舎のとこでも、なんか3つの店。
3店舗？
そう、3店舗のボードゲームの場所がある。なんか2万、3万、まあ人口はってこと。以下の町でも結構多い。ボードゲームのホビーショップという。
That's in America.
そう、アメリカ。でも日本だとそういうような場所がなかなかないと思った。
If you want to buy board games, then you have to go to Tokyo or like city place. So.
今でもそのボードゲームは例えば、ジェリーショップの店員さんは、マジック・ザ・ガザリングについて何も知らなかった。でもアメリカではまあ、そういうカードゲームをやる人だったら絶対その名前知ってると思うんだけど、まあ、つまりそういうことに興味あったら東京に行くしかないってことが明白だった。
I guess if you asked if he knew Yu-Gi-Oh, then he will definitely say that he knows the Yu-Gi-Oh.
そうそう。Yu-Gi-Oh かCard Fight Vanguard とポケモンとかは結構有名。まあ、流行ってるというか、日本で。
Yeah, but that's so the 店員さん shop clerk?
あ、そうそうそうそう。なんか自分でゲームを作ったことがある。
Yeah, so he gave us his own game.
そうすごく優しかった。それ絶対にそのジェリーボードゲームだと思うんだけど。
Was it? We have to put the website.
ウェブサイトあるのかな？
I don't know.
まあ見てみる。行ってみてください。And we're back with the final section. And if you made it to the final section, that means you should drop an email to lazyfluency@gmail.com with a question, comment, language related and or otherwise, or give us an Apple review. It's been a while since we've had one, or any other place you can give reviews. And this week we have 2 responses, and I kind of need to defend myself, but I will read the responses first, and we'll go right ahead with regards to nipples, I'll say. And I was considering having my shirt off for this segment right now.
まあね、まあ少なくとも誰かしらジョイのね、ニポーズに抵抗を覚える方がいらっしゃると思いましたので、今回は我慢しておいたということでよろしいでしょうか。
My nipples might come out at a later date, but for now, they're staying hidden. But yeah, I'll read the first comment from Shockox. I'm team everyone nipples. We're all just a bunch of meat sacks. Let the meat sacks fly. Manspreading is a whole other thing. Trash. Take up the correct amount of space. I think that my thing is that if the thing affects other people, it shouldn't be done. Manspreading takes up space. The nipples and nudity doesn't really affect other people. I'm all on team avert your eyes and you'll live for that one. Team nipple. It is because I'm a sweaty man nipple runner. Is it because I'm a sweaty man nipple runner? Yes. Everyone should have the opportunity. Also, nipple chafing. It's awful if you've ever experienced this with long distance running. That's one of my bigger ones. Anyone who can experience nipple chafing, aka everyone, should be allowed and encouraged to run shirtless. And this other comment from Oddity. Hey, it's not like I'm saying men have organized to deliberately shove their nipples in my face. It is the game that I hate. But the game was made by men. So while I would love for nipples of every kind be emancipated as the disenfranchised gender, I can't do that. It's up to men to do so. As for manspreading, I'm with Ayami. Common Joey. That was a total cop-out. Haha. Somewhere your gender studies 101 prof, I'm betting you had one, is cringing at the sound of the gravity of that explanation. Lol. Cringing at the sound of that gravity explanation. Lol. The other thing about manspreading is that if I try to counter it by asserting my space and not moving aside, it would inevitably result in touching the man. Sadly, within 2 minutes, that would devolve into Sorry, let me do this properly. So, you come here often? That's kind of similar to what Aimi said about playing with boys, if I understood. I just want to ride the bus and do my Anki. Haha. Okay. First thing I want to say here, I'm not defending manspreaders. My whole point was I was giving an explanation as to why people have the inclination to manspread in the first place. I'm just saying, like, there's not a cabal between every single, like Japanese people, Americans, Canadians, who are all men. There's a reason we sit like that, and I'm saying that just physics probably has to do with it. That's all I'm saying. Now, whether you manspread, if you do manspread and you're actually, if there's space you're actually taking up and you're blocking other people from sitting or whatever, then I think that makes you an asshole. I'm not defending that. I was just giving an explanation. I don't think that manspreading as a phenomenon stems from any sort of patriarchal oppression. Obviously, the manspreading intentionally and maybe not caring about how other people perceive you and bothering people, you could make an argument there. But I don't think the actual wanting to sit in that way, given that it's cross-cultural, I mean, there's a whole other thing, but just across the entire world, I think it's more likely that stems from other reasons than directly from the patriarchy. Do you have any comments about manspreading while we're on manspreading?
まあ電車で見る限りは、まあ足広げるのは大体男の人で、まあなぜかっていうと、まあ女の人が足広げるのは、まあなんていうの、タブーって言っちゃタブーっていうか、まあその もし女の人が開いてたら、ちょっとあの人で大丈夫かなみたいな感じで、まあ見られるっていうのもあるし、まああと、体の作り的には、まあ男の人の方がさ、骨盤が狭いわけよ。女の人はやっぱ赤ちゃんを産むから、広くできてるから、まあ、その分、なんていうの太ももの骨が収まるところが、まあ、狭いから、まあ、ちょっと広がっちゃうのはちょっとわかるし、あと、あれかな。足が長いんじゃない男の人は。
I mean, my thing is basically just saying we have balls. That's all I'm trying to say. I'm saying there are balls currently in between our legs, and I feel like that contributes to it. There might be a thing about technically having wider waist or something like that. I'm not trying to get into that weird science, or if that isn't even a thing. I'm just saying, with my personal experience, that is why I have an inclination to do it. It's keep it simple. I'm not defending people doing it. Let me be clear here. I think I was maybe not being clear. I'm not defending people doing it. I'm trying to explain why you can find that in Japanese trains as well as Canadian trains and in America and even in Panama. And I've been in all these places and I've seen manspreading. I don't think...
まあ、一つ、ちょっと直してほしいっていうところが、マンスプレディングしてるじゃん。足広げて座ってるじゃん。で、それを何食わず顔で、なんていうの、二人分の席取ってるやつがいるの。なんか頑張って端に寄ろうとせずに、もう二つの席があった真ん中に座って、なんか足広げて座るバカガイズがいるんだよ。
Yeah, no. My defense on manspreading is in a situation where there is enough space for everybody to manspread, if that makes sense. So, if you have you're in a full train and there are 4 people, every one of them could manspread if they wanted to, or sleep on a bench. Therefore, if you manspread in that situation, you're not indirectly or directly prohibiting somebody from sitting down. But there's situations where you're saying where maybe you want to sit down, but somebody's... We saw something on the train actually like this. I mean, like I said, literally where there was space, we wanted to sit down. See, I was affected by manspreading too. I wanted to sit down. We were walking for a very long time. And then they were one person on one seat was taking up 2 seats, and another person in another place was taking up 2 seats.
で、詰めようともせずに足を広げて、新聞こうやって読んだりとか、ちょっと、みたいな感じだったから。ね、努力しようとしないのが、ちょっと、annoying だよ。
Yeah, and just to cover some other questions, because there already made some other points that I want to discuss. And so, next point she made was about, I think, the middle section of our last episode, about me complaining about cars and narrow sidewalks in rural Japan. So, about cars and narrow sidewalks, I share Joey's views. Ironically, it's bikes and scooters that I have beef with. So, Tel Aviv is like Tokyo in that most people use these, and they use the bike lane most of the city. Oh no, they bike laned most of the city. However, that mostly came at the expense of sidewalks. I don't jog, but I am a walker, so my space has been reduced, and to top it all off, Israelis don't give a shit about having bike lanes and just ride all over the place. So I've been nearly run over by scooters 3 times already, but that's more of a people issue. I couldn't understand why they have women-only train cars. So first, Aimi, do you want to explain why they only have women-only train cars in Japan?
まあ、多分、メインリーズンは痴漢が多いからだと思う。
That is molestation.
痴漢
Yeah, that is how it's translated. Yeah, molestation. But more specifically, well, actually, you could 2 things. One, people putting cameras in trains under people's skirts, and the other one is people putting their hands on women's butts and under their skirts and things like that.
確かにそう、盗撮とかもね、あるから。で、多分、電車がここまで発達してるのは日本ぐらいじゃない？世界の中でも。
With what?
電車がもう、例えば東京とかだったら電車がメインの transportation じゃん。
I mean, it depends on what level of the country you're talking about. Sweden has an awesome public transportation system.
あそこまで満員電車じゃないでしょ。
Well, I mean, they have in rural, Sweden, for example, because we were talking about, rural Japan can't because they don't have as many trains. I was watching a whole video, but not just bikes. Awesome channel.
でもあれだよ。例えば東京だとさ、いろんな線がさ、もう。
No, obviously I'm talking about, when you're talking about Tokyo's in its own class, I'm saying. But obviously, I think Singapore, given how small it is, has an extremely good urban transportation. I mean, it's definitely... You can argue for number 1. I don't think there's any... Maybe the only thing you could argue is that China recently has it has some really, like, if you're talking about full distance across like how long a rail system is, China's is now massively long now.
まあ、クオリティはさておきだけど。
Yeah. Well, also its density is a whole different thing. Japan's density is crazy.
まあそうだから、まあ通勤時間ってやっぱり満員電車になってね、そういう痴漢男たちが、いや、今がチャンスだとか言って、盗撮したり、痴漢したりするから、それの防止のためっていうのもあるのかな?
Yeah. Also, what I'll say is my hatred towards cars extends to scooters as well. And so here's my thing. If the thing takes up more, so scooters are smaller, so they get less hate from me in that sense. But if something takes up more space than than it needs to, so you have a vehicle for 4 or 5 people and it's only occupying one person, I dislike it. If it's not gas efficient, which every single independent vehicle is not if it relies on gas when we're comparing it to trains, then I dislike it. If it makes a lot of noise pollution, then I dislike it. Therefore, I also dislike scooters. I like bikes because, like I said, they don't have gas. They don't take up that much extra space. They obviously take up more space than walking, but obviously the time you can walk and the time for bike are slightly different. And they don't make that much noise. If there's a sidewalk problem, that is totally on, as it seems like you're aware of, the urban infrastructure of Tel Aviv, where they need to, walking should be the easiest thing to do. Everybody can walk, low pollution, not that loud.
それはだから、あれでしょ?まあ、ウォークすればいいんだけど、それは電車が発達してる地域じゃないと可能じゃないんだよ。例えば職場がさ、駅から1時間離れてるっていうところ。
No. She's saying in Tel Aviv that they have the problem that there are too many bikes and scooters. And so my thing is, and because they're taking at the expense of the sidewalk. And I'm saying, I totally agree with you there that if you're going to have bikes, you should have dedicated bike lanes, which they have in a lot of Europe, and shout out to like Sweden and Amsterdam.
歩行者とバイクは別々にすべきだと。
Yeah, exactly. They're two different types of transport.
まあ、そりゃそうだ。
Yeah, but
けど、あれだよ、スクーターにもスクーターでそういう使う理由はあって、歩きだけじゃ行けないところに行けるじゃん。さっきも言ったようにさ、あれだよ。駅からめちゃめちゃもう歩いたら 1,2 時間かかっちゃうところにさ、行くときはさ、やっぱりそういうの使わないと電車で行けないから。
I'm just saying individual transport vehicles that run off gas have almost no benefits to them that could not be replaced by a better system of trains, bikes, and walking. There are very, very few situations that's true. And the only times it is true is when you're in intermittent stages of implementing a better infrastructure. Personally speaking, that is my opinion on that.
もうずっともうカーが嫌いとかずっと言ってんの。
I despise cars. They're just in every possible way. Anyways, there are also 2 more questions at the end, so we can wrap up, that Oddity had. Does this mean that when Ayumi starts interning, she'll have to wear high heels?
Interning は
doing rotations, I guess.
No. っていうか逆にタブー to wear high heels. なんていうの We have to be あれだよ。less noisy walking around hospitals だから。ね、ちゃんとなんか決められた白い靴を履かないといけないの。なんかスニーカーっぽいやつ。
That's hilarious. So, I mean, the thing I find funny about that is it just they say the sound, or is there any other, do they say like, well, if you wear high heels, I wonder if you asked them about that and said, well, what if I got like very quiet high heels? Like all...
ハイヒール、だってそもそも危ないから。例えばハイヒールってやっぱりさ、ここ空いてるじゃん。で、もしあれじゃん。例えば患者さんとかのさ、やっぱバディフルイッドとかが高かったらさ、インフェクションとかになったり、あと刃物とか使うじゃん。危ないじゃん。しかもバランスがね、大変じゃん。ハイヒールはタブーだね。ダメ。履いちゃダメ。ルール違反。
Okay. And so the last question, also for Joey, I was wondering what you find has changed in Japan between your last visit and now. Oh gosh, this is so easy. Masks. People wore masks before, but now it's a straight up paranoia. Everybody in rural Japan, people are walking in the middle of nowhere. Like straight up with just trees around them, and I see you got way down there and he's wearing a mask. And if you're not wearing a mask, they'll look at you. I mean, they're already gonna look at me. I just noticed how many people look at me when we walk around.
That was because あれだよ. You look
I'm a foreigner, but I'm saying if I wasn't wearing a mask, I'd get double stared at.
まあまあそう、ダボだね。
I don't know if it double because everybody stares at me. So hypothetically, if you had a Japanese person who wasn't wearing a mask, they'd get looked at.
不審者を見かけたら110番。
Yeah. Yeah, so that's, hopefully we've answered all your questions. I'm trying to think, oh, what?
ショコックスのあれ。
Oh, nipples! Nipples! I forgot about the nipples. Oh no, he was mostly about, manspreading. But yeah, I think, what are your thoughts? Should I have done this episode with that? Because you guys are both on Team Nipples. I thought it would have been, if there was any episodes I should have done shirtless, it should have been this episode. I'm kind of disappointed in myself for not doing it shirtless. But there were potential criticisms, and so I was like, wow, whatever.
Boo-boo.
Yeah, let me know. Should I regret having not done this episode shirtless? And Audie, would you have been offended if I did this episode shirtless, in theme with Team Nipples? But yeah, thank you so much. That bell means we've reached the end of today's episode. Thanks for joining us in another lazy conversation towards fluency. If you have any language-related questions and or just looking for general advice, send an email to lazyfluency@gmail.com and we might respond in the next episode. Also, make sure to check out our podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and more. We'd appreciate the support. This has been Joey.
And Ayumi.
Signing off. Jane. Also, try running shirtless. Nipple chafing is a big deal. Just forgot to say that.